candles, ate some hot Cheetos. Let's do this. Hi, my name's Rachel, welcome to Rachel's Reading, and today I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up. Honestly, I don't know if anybody else felt like this, but January felt like it was like 3 months long. It felt so long, never ending. It's finally February, today's February 1st, and I read a lot of books in January. Because it felt so long, I was able to get a lot done, and I'm going to be talking about 9 books today, which is a lot for me. Technically I only finished 8 because I DNF'd one, but that's still really good for me. I feel like that's a lot of books, and some of them were kind of long. So, because I have so many things to talk about, I just want to get started, leave the intro short, and here we go. Alright, so the first thing that I finished in January, I finished it on the first day of January, and that is Dropkick Romance by Cyrus Parker. This is a poetry collection by Amanda Lovelace's husband. I was really excited to read this because I heard Amanda Lovelace really kind of taught him how to write poetry and really helped out with this book, and which made me really excited because I love Amanda Lovelace. She is my favorite poetry author. I love her books, and I was super excited to read this, hoping maybe I'd get some of the same thing. And I kind of did get the same thing, but not in the way that I wanted. This poetry collection is about kind of getting out of a toxic relationship and learning how to love again and finding love, but unfortunately this one felt really average to me. The thing that really kind of bothered me about this is it felt like just a knockoff of Amanda Lovelace. The line spacing and breaking and position on the page really felt like exactly the same thing that she writes, and I was hoping for something similar but not just a carbon copy. There were a couple though that I really liked, and that made me really happy that this wasn't entirely a flop for me. There were a couple that I really did enjoy. So I ended up giving this book 3.5 out of 5 stars just because I felt like it was just exceedingly average. That's like most of the emotion that I ever felt about this was just it was average. But those couple that I really did enjoy definitely bumped it up for me, because without that I definitely would not have liked it as much at all. The second thing that I read and finished this year was A Danger to Herself and Others by Alyssa Scheinwell. Where do I start with this? I'm gonna start out by saying that I rate books high. I'm not going to lie. If I just thought it was average or okay, I will give it 3 stars, and then if I really liked it, anything above that. I rarely give books 2 stars. I never give things 1 star just because I don't generally pick up things that I don't like. I know my reading taste and I know myself, so I usually end up reading books that I enjoy. But this one, I thought about making an entire rant review about this book. That's how much it frustrated me. I gave this 2 stars, but I really feel like giving it lower, and that's so weird for me because I rate books so high, but this just bothered me in so many ways. So this book is about a girl named Hannah who is currently in a mental institution awaiting trial because she is suspected of pushing her best friend out of their dorm window and paralyzing her. And she doesn't believe that she should be here, she knows she didn't do it, and thinks that the entire thing is ridiculous, that she's even suspected, but she currently has to cope with being in this mental institution, going to therapy, and all of these things. And the concept of this really intrigued me. I got an arc of this and I was super excited to read it, but there were so many things that bothered me about this. So the thing that really bothered me about this book, I guess this is a minor spoiler. I will put up something at the bottom of the screen until I'm done talking about this. It's really not that bad, but they don't ever reveal her diagnosis. They talk about it all the time. They talk about her illness and they talk about it with her parents and all the coping mechanisms and therapy and medication that she's going to be put on to fix this. And they never tell you what it is. But the symptoms that they talk about could be anything. They could be a number of different disorders, and I don't like that it was just left open. I wish that they had said something about it. Everybody called her illness a disease. A disease is something you can catch. Mental illness is not a disease. And I get if in the story maybe her parents or people that didn't understand called this a disease, because there are people out there that just don't get it. But even her doctor and her therapist would call it a disease and talk to her parents about her disease, and this bothered me so much. The one thing that I want to talk about is the writing. It was very he said, she did this, he did this, I went and did this, with no like embellishment. And if we're gonna write a book, make it interesting, you know? Don't just make it, I walked over here and sat down on the bed, you know? And that kind of made it really boring to me, and I got like over halfway in and I just felt like nothing had happened. Even though events had occurred, I just felt like nothing important had happened yet. And the worst thing to me about the writing was the use of parentheses. There were parentheses on at least every page, if not multiple sets of parentheses on every page. And this book is written in first person, and the idea with first person is so you can listen to the character's thoughts. You don't need to put these in brackets. Every time Hannah had a thought that was not vocalized, it would be in brackets. Like, for example, her therapist walked in and said, you know, let's say, you're going to group therapy today, and then Hannah would say, okay, brackets, I didn't want to do this. Like, you don't need the brackets. I honestly could go on for a while about this book and why I didn't like it, but I'm gonna stop it here because this is not an entire review and I'm not going to do that. And so, continuing on the streak of books that I didn't like, we have The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Before you come at me, I know. I read this book for school, and that is 99.9% of the reason why I didn't like this. The entire situation while reading this, I felt very, very stressed about it. The quizzes and tests that we had to take for this book were really, really difficult for me, and I just felt stressed and upset and anxious every time I had to pick it up, which obviously tainted my view of this story. Even to the extent where I don't want to reread it in the future. I just now have such a negative view of this book, which is really unfortunate because I know that this is such a classic, important piece of literature, and I just can't stand it now. I don't really have much to say about the story itself and what I liked and didn't like, just because I feel like I don't really have a real justification of my thoughts on this book because I don't really know how much I would have liked it or not, having read it on my own accord, and this often happens to me with books that I have to read for school. I don't like them as much as I think that I probably would if I read them on my own accord. I don't like being forced to read something when I don't want to read it. If you are unfamiliar with the story, it's about this boy named Huckleberry Finn, or Huck, who ends up going on these kind of runaway adventures with a couple of people that he gets to know and his friend. And I don't really think that this book would be for me anyway, but I wouldn't have disliked it nearly as much. I didn't write this book just because I feel like I can't give a real justification, but I read it. So finally, we're gonna get to a book that I actually enjoyed. So the next book that I read, I actually listened to an audio, and that is Misery by Stephen King. So if you haven't noticed the trend in my videos yet, Stephen King is my favorite author, ever. I love him so much. I actually have a goal right now that before I die, I want to read every single one of his books. And that's a really daunting task, so I've set myself up to read at least one of his books per month, if not more, and that will really help me make a dent in these things. I've already read quite a few, and I actually might make a video about this at the end of the year, talking about everything that I've read. I don't know yet, but I'm really excited that I'm doing this. It makes me really happy. But Misery. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I really, really liked it. The audiobook was really good. This story is about this man named Paul Sheldon, who is a writer of an extremely popular book series called Misery. It has a lot of fans, and one day he's driving home and he gets in a car crash and he wakes up in this house and he doesn't know where he is and he's stuck to a bed. And it turns out that this deranged fan named Annie Wilkes has kidnapped him, drugged him, and taken him back to her house as her prisoner, so he will write the next Misery novel because he killed off the main character in the book that he had just published. And he does not like that. This book was filled with suspense. I think listening to the audiobook definitely made it more suspenseful. There was like music and stuff and noises in the background, which I really enjoy in books. I know some people don't, but I really like them. I think it kind of adds to the environment and a just aesthetic of the story. And it was so creepy. It's very gory, so if that's something that bothers you, be warned that there's definitely some gore in here. There's trigger warning for that, and, you know, drugs and violence and just that sort of thing in general, you know. I was always wondering what Annie would do next and how the story would turn out, and I really, really love this. Stephen King is a genius, and I'm so excited to continue reading more of his books this year. So now I'm going to be talking about the one book that I DNF'd this month, and it is a controversial one, and that is The Wicked King by Holly Black. Please don't kill me. This book is the sequel to The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, which was extremely, extremely hyped up and popular last year in the book community. It's about these two sisters named Jude and Taryn who are half fae. So basically the story is about these two sisters named Jude and Taryn who are half Fae and under some circumstances have to go live in the Fae world. And it's basically about them getting caught up in like court politics and that sort of thing with royalty and how they learn to adapt and how people kind of view them because they're not full fairy, they're humans and they weren't from there. Honestly, I wish I could tell you more, but I don't even remember. The issue that I had with The Cruel Prince is I read this and I gave it 3 stars because while I did enjoy a little bit of it, I just overwhelmingly found myself with this sense of boredom, which is really unfortunate. And I guess what I mean boredom is that when I read books, I get very engrossed in the story. I, don't really notice things that are happening around me, like noises or like my phone. But when I was reading The Cruel Prince, I was getting distracted by every little single thing. I just could not keep myself focused on the story. I also kept forgetting like every little thing that was happening before in the story. I just couldn't contain anything. And I was really hoping that with The Wicked King being the sequel, that it would get better, but unfortunately for me, I think it just got worse. I was continually finding myself just bored again, and I couldn't remember what was going on, especially because I had read The Cruel Prince almost a year ago, and I watched some videos, some recaps, I read some stuff about it. I still couldn't remember anything, and I realized at some point that I just didn't care what happened in the story and what happened to the characters, and it's not worth reading something that I don't really enjoy or I found myself bored with. So I DNF'd this. I think I got like 100 pages in. It was significantly less than half, even though this book is quite short. And it's just not for me, I don't think. This book that I read was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And this book is gonna be on my favorites of the year list. I can just feel it. I can feel it in my soul. I loved this book so much. Easily 5 out of 5 stars. And this is one that I was actually really nervous going into because literally everybody and their mother and their dog was talking about how good this book was. And it scared me a little bit because I wanted to like it so much. Luckily, I did. This book is about an old Hollywood starlet named Evelyn Hugo who after a tragic event in her life became very secluded from the public and paparazzi and became very reclusive. Nobody had heard from her in years. And out of nowhere, this journalist named Monique, who works at a magazine, got this opportunity to do an exclusive interview with Evelyn Hugo about some dresses that she was auctioning off to charity. But it turns out to be a lot more than that and ends up being a piece about Evelyn Hugo and her history in the film industry and all of her scandals, including having 7 husbands in her lifetime. I loved this book so much. I didn't think that I would. It's adult fiction, which is not really a genre that I read that much, but it was just so good. There was incredible representation in this story. There's Cuban rep and there's bisexual and gay, which I had no idea going into this. I felt like nobody was talking about it, which was really weird because that is a very big theme in this story. Both of these things are, and it was fantastic. The representation made me so happy. This book gave me something that I haven't felt in a long time, which was like real raw emotion. Like I laughed out loud and I cried, which I don't really cry at books that much anymore, and it hasn't happened in a long time, but this book made me cry. I was sitting at my table painting with like tears leaking down my cheeks. And I listened to this on audio as well, and I really recommend the audiobook. It was really, really good. Everybody needs to read it. Like it's so good. The next book I have is one of the 2 physical copies of any of these books that I have, and that is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I would like to just take a moment and send a prayer out to my book. It got very water damaged. It sat in a puddle of spilled water bottle for like 2 hours and it's all weird now. And this was one of the cool editions and it's just it's such a tragedy. Okay, but that aside, I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really, really, really enjoyed this book. So basically, this story is about this mysterious circus that appears in random places at random times with no warning preceding it, and it follows the timelines of a couple people. My favorite part about this book was the atmosphere. It was purely magical. I really don't know how else to describe it. It was like enveloping you in magic. The kind of sensory details that it gives is insane. Like it feels like you are just wrapped up in this cozy blanket of like enchantments, and that sounds really weird, but like it does, and that's such a good thing. The only thing I have to say about this was, for me, it felt a little bit dull in just the middle of it, like the very middle section. I felt like not a lot was going on to further the plot, and it was just kind of the characters existing, which I know a lot of people enjoy. I just wasn't really feeling it with this book, but everything else was so good that it made up for it. I don't even care. This book was so fantastic, and I love it so much, and I'm going to be getting a new copy soon so I can actually reread it because the words are smudged. So the second to last book that I read this month was Living Dead Girls by Elizabeth Scott. Okay, I'm just gonna put a giant trigger warning for literally every single possible thing about this book. The book is about this girl called Alice who, when she was 10 years old, was kidnapped by this pedophile named Ray and has been kept in his custody for almost 5 years, getting raped and abused every single day. She's getting increasingly worried about her life because the last girl that Ray kidnapped, he killed when she turned 15 years old. Again, trigger warning for like everything on this book: pedophilia, rape, abuse, disordered eating, self-harm. I think that one of this book's virtues is how short it is. It's only 170 pages, but it really packs a gut punch in those 170 pages. I think that having that shock value is something that maybe once or twice everybody needs to read, just to be kind of woken up and saying, hey, really bad things like this happen. Even though this is a work of fiction, this is not fake. Gave it 3 out of 5 stars, mainly because of the writing style. It wasn't really my thing. There are things that kind of bothered me a lot of times. Just the way it was written, I don't really know how to describe it, really. I can't really pick out certain bits and pieces of it that I didn't like. Just as a whole, the writing style wasn't really for me. But that being said, this book was just so emotional that I don't want to rate it any lower than 3 out of 5, just because it was so impactful and it made me think. The final book that I read in January is the second book that I actually have a physical copy of, and that is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. The other book that I read for school, and I know I said I usually don't really rate school books, but this one's an exception because I have already read this. This is my second time reading this. And I think that, as much as I shit on it earlier, there is something to be said for reading books in a class. I noticed so many more things than I did the first time that I read this. Like, look at all these tabs! Look at all these tabs about things that I loved and didn't really see the first time around. If you don't know, this book follows a man named Nick Carraway in the 1920s who lives next door to this extremely rich man named Jay Gatsby, who is always having these elaborate parties. People all over know him, except nobody really knows who he truly is. All anybody knows is rumors that have been passed around about him. Hello, I'm filming this on my phone, I'm wearing pajamas, I don't have makeup on, and I'm getting sick, which are all fantastic things. At the end of the video that I was filming, my camera freaked out and is still currently sort of broken, so I need to figure that out, but I just needed to film an outro. It's several days later. Hope we're having a time. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And comment down below. I'd love to talk to you. All my social media links are in the description. Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you!